the only man who ran away from the smell of bread. The first day I met Orlando, he ran out of my class. Not because he hated me, not because the food I made was terrible, but simply because the smell of freshly baked bread. It was the strangest thing I had ever witnessed. The oven had just been opened, the scent of melting butter mingling with hot flour spreading through the university's practice kitchen. 15 students standing around the long wooden table were all smiling because the semester's first batch of bread had turned out well. Except one person. He froze. His face went pale. His eyes looked as though they'd just seen something terrifying. Then, without a word, he untied his apron, opened the door, and ran straight outside. The whole room fell silent. A female student asked quietly, "Sir, is he allergic to flour?" I shook my head. I don't know either. That was the first time I saw Orlando. And it was also the first time I realized there are people who aren't afraid of knives, not afraid of fire, not afraid of failure, but afraid of a single scent. My name is Garrett, 22 years old, a final-year culinary education student at a university in Massachusetts. While my friends were sending applications to famous restaurants in New York or Chicago, I spent nearly every afternoon standing in the school kitchen, teaching students who had never managed to cook a single meal in their lives. My friends often teased me, "Garrett, with your skill, you should be standing in the kitchen of a 5-star hotel." I just smiled. I never dreamed of becoming a famous chef. What I loved most was the moment someone made, with their own hands, a dish they once thought they could never make. That moment was more beautiful than any Michelin star. Maybe it was because I grew up in a family where the kitchen was always the place people apologized, gave thanks, and loved one another. I believe food doesn't just fill a stomach, keeps people together. The school's Cooking for Life program had existed for nearly 10 years. Any student could sign up. No cooking experience needed. No requirement to be in a related major. No tuition fee. 1 session a week. The goal was simple, so that when they graduated and lived on their own, no one would have to eat frozen food for 7 days straight. I was the youngest instructor in the program that year. Honestly, at first I was more anxious than the students. What if they got bored? What if I wasn't a good enough teacher? What if I couldn't make them feel the kitchen was a place worth loving? I spent 2 weeks preparing my lesson plans. But every plan changed because of one person, Orlando. The next day, as I was arranging ingredients for the next class, the kitchen door creaked open. The person who had run away the day before stood at the door. He was almost half a head taller than me. An old denim jacket, a faded black backpack, dark brown hair still slightly damp from the rain. He didn't step inside. He just stood at the threshold. "I'm sorry." That was the first sentence he ever said to me. "I ruined your class." "I didn't mean to." I smiled. "It's fine. Are you okay?" He nodded quickly. "Yeah." But his eyes avoided mine. I had met plenty of people who lied. Orlando was one of them. Not the kind of lie meant to deceive others, but the kind meant to seem like he was fine. I didn't ask further. Instead, I handed him a paper box. "Bread." He looked at me. "Don't worry. This batch hasn't been baked yet." He burst out laughing. His first laugh. It softened his otherwise cold face completely. "Are you always this funny?" "Only when a student's about to make a run for it." He took the box but didn't open it. "Garrett, could you give me one more chance?" I looked into those deep blue eyes. For the first time, I felt that the man in front of me was carrying a very long story. A story he himself didn't yet have the courage to tell. And I had absolutely no idea that one day I would be the one to help him write the ending of that story. I agreed to let Orlando come back to class. But I set one condition. "You don't have to cook right away." Orlando frowned. "Then why would I even come?" "Come to get used to the kitchen first." He looked at me for a few seconds, then laughed. "That sounds like you're training a cat that's afraid of water." "I've handled harder cases than that." "How bad?" "Someone once thought a chef's knife and a butter knife were the same thing." "What happened after?" "Now she owns a bakery." Orlando laughed loudly. This time, his laugh was far more natural than the day before. I didn't know if that was a good sign or not, but at least he had stepped into the kitchen. That day's class had a very simple theme: making salad, sauce, and sandwiches. No fire, no oven, no smell of freshly baked bread. I had deliberately changed the lesson plan the night before, not out of favoritism toward Orlando, but because I wanted to know what had made him run. If simply avoiding the oven could make him stay, that meant the problem wasn't cooking itself. Orlando chose the table at the back. He watched more than he worked. While the other students chattered and laughed, he quietly wrote down every step I demonstrated. His handwriting was beautiful, neat, patient, exactly like the person he was trying to present himself as. During the break, I brought a pitcher of lemonade and set it on the table. Everyone, 15 minutes. The students quickly filed out into the hallway. Only Orlando stayed seated. I thought you'd go out too. He shook his head. I don't like crowds. What about lunch? I'm not eating. Why not? I'm used to it. The answer was too short, too quick, as if he'd said that line hundreds of times before. I looked at the worn backpack at his feet. The zipper was frayed. One corner of the fabric had been mended with blue thread. I didn't know why, but something told me Orlando wasn't the type to skip meals just to lose weight. 3 weeks passed. Orlando never missed a single class. He remained the slowest student in the group, but also the most diligent. After every class, he always stayed behind to wipe the tables, wash the knives, stack the chairs. No one asked him to. He just did it on his own. Once I said, "Let me do that." He answered very softly, "Being able to help someone makes me feel useful." I froze, not because of what he said, but because of how he said it, as if it had been a very long time since anyone had needed him. Friday afternoon, I happened to see Orlando outside the library. He was wearing the uniform of a coffee shop on campus. Black apron, white shirt, standing behind the register. I walked in and ordered a latte. Orlando looked up. Clearly he hadn't expected to see me there. "Garrett, I thought cooking instructors only drink espresso. I thought my student only knew how to cut tomatoes." He laughed. For the first time, I saw that laugh reach his eyes. "I work here in the evenings." "From what time?" 4 to 10. "Which days?" "Almost every day. Weekends too." "Same." I was a little surprised. "That's quite a schedule." Orlando just shrugged. "Rent doesn't pay itself." That was the first time he'd mentioned his own life. Just one sentence, but enough for me to understand. He was supporting himself entirely on his own. In the following weeks, I started stopping by the coffee shop often. First, just to buy a drink. Later, to see Orlando. He always remembered I liked my latte with less sugar. I always remembered he never took a free drink for himself. One evening close to closing time, I asked, "Aren't you having anything?" "No. You've been on your feet all evening. Saves money." I pretended not to hear, but inside, something felt heavier. In early October, the school held its autumn festival. Our department was in charge of an outdoor cooking booth. I invited the whole class to help out. Orlando agreed to come too. That morning the air was cool. Red maple leaves covered the walkways. Country music played across campus. Orlando showed up in a cream-colored sweater. Took me a few seconds to recognize him. Not because of the clothes, but because, for the first time, he genuinely looked relaxed. "Does it look good?" He spread his arms out. "I just bought it at a thrift shop. I think it suits you." "Really?" "Yeah. Looks like a college student." He burst out laughing. "Good. I was worried I'd look like a professor." I laughed along with him. I don't know when it started, but making Orlando laugh had become the thing I looked forward to most each week. Around noon, we started baking handmade bread to give away for free. I had just lifted the lid of the portable oven. The smell of hot butter spread immediately. I turned around. Orlando stood frozen. His face was white as paper. His hands trembled slightly. Without a word, he turned around, left the booth. This time, he didn't run, but that retreating back made my heart sink. I watched him for a long time. This was no longer a coincidence. The smell of bread was calling back a memory Orlando was trying to bury. And I knew, if I truly wanted to step into his world, I would have to wait patiently until the day Orlando trusted me enough to open that door himself. I didn't chase after Orlando that day. Many times in life, I had learned one very simple thing. There are people who need a hand reaching out to them. But there are also people who need to be allowed to be alone. Orlando was the second kind. The festival ended later than planned. By the time I finished packing away the last cutting boards and returned the equipment to the department storeroom, dusk had already fallen. Walking past the parking lot behind the student center, I saw a figure sitting on a wooden bench by the pond. It was Orlando. He hadn't noticed me at all. Elbows on his knees, hands clasped together, eyes fixed on the still surface of the water. I stood some distance away. Finally, I said just loud enough for him to hear, "There's still class tomorrow." Orlando turned his head. A flicker of surprise crossed his eyes. "I know. It's fine if you want to skip a session." He shook his head. "I'll be there." "Good." I was about to leave when he called out, "Garrett." I turned back. "Thank you for not asking." I only smiled. "I'll wait until you're ready to tell me." Orlando looked at me for a long moment, then nodded slightly. The following week, I deliberately designed a completely different lesson. No bread, no butter, no oven. We learned to make fresh pasta by hand. The students laughed and chattered as flour dusted their clothes. Orlando did too. For the first time, I noticed a streak of white flour on his cheek. "Don't move," he startled. "What?" "Let me get that for you." I reached out and gently wiped the flour from his cheek. That moment lasted only a few seconds. But Orlando suddenly went completely still. The distance between us was close enough that I could hear him breathing. I'm done." I pulled my hand back. "Sorry." "No." He smiled very softly. "I'm just not used to." "Not used to what?" "Having someone take care of me." That sentence made something in my chest tighten. After class, Orlando stayed behind again to wash the dishes. It had almost become a habit by then. While wiping down the tables, I asked, "What are you majoring in?" "Architecture." "I thought you studied business." "Why would you think that? You're always carrying a laptop." He laughed. "I take freelance work doing 3D modeling. Evenings, the coffee shop. Nights, drawing. Mornings, class." I paused what I was doing. "When do you sleep?" "During the history professor's lectures." I laughed out loud. "Don't let them hear you say that." "Don't worry. The professor sleeps too." That was the first time I saw Orlando make a joke. A very dry kind of humor, but charming all the same. By mid-October, I began to notice something. Orlando never ate with the group. Every class produced food the students had made themselves. The others would rush to try each other's dishes. He always said, "I already ate. I'm not hungry. I'll take it home for later." But the container of food he carried with him was always untouched, every single time. One day, after class had ended, I opened the practice kitchen's refrigerator to put away some ingredients. On the bottom shelf were 3 plastic containers, all labeled with Orlando's name, all unopened. I stood frozen. He hadn't taken them home. He hadn't eaten them either. He'd just left them there, until the food spoiled and the cleaning staff threw it away. Why? 2 days later, I got my answer. Not from Orlando, but from Melissa, the manager of the campus coffee shop. "I saw Orlando during his break," Melissa said as she brewed coffee. "Is he okay?" "Why do you ask?" "He gets dizzy a lot. I told him to rest, but he wouldn't. He even fainted in the storeroom once." I froze. "Fainted?" Melissa sighed. "He's saving every penny he can. He barely eats 1 meal a day." I felt my throat tighten. 1 meal a day. While every week I watched him leave behind portions large enough for 2 people. That night I couldn't sleep. The next morning I went to the kitchen very early. I made 2 lunch boxes myself. One for me, one for Orlando. Pan-seared chicken, roasted vegetables, brown rice, a few slices of apple. At exactly noon, I found him in the architecture department's design studio. Orlando was bent over a model of a bridge. The shadows under his eyes were darker than usual. "Garrett, I brought lunch." He looked at the box, then shook his head. "I can't accept it." "Why not?" "It's too much. I made it myself. It still costs money." Then, I pretended to think. "You could do me a favor." "What favor?" "I need someone to taste test it. Otherwise I won't know if this is too salty." Orlando was silent. I knew he was smart enough to see through what I was doing, but he also understood. I was trying to protect his pride while still helping him. Eventually, he took the box. "Just this once." "Sure. I'll pretend to believe that." He smiled, a very small smile, but more beautiful than any loaf of bread I had ever baked. That afternoon, Orlando texted me for the first time. "Thank you." Just 2 words. I replied. "Too salty?" It was almost 10 minutes before he texted back. "If I said it was the best meal I've had all year, would that be too much?" I smiled at my phone screen. "A little, but I'll allow it." 3 dots appeared and disappeared several times. Finally, Orlando sent one more message. "Garrett, it's been a long time since anyone cooked a meal just for me." I read that message over and over. I don't know why, but a strange feeling rose up inside me. Not pity, not simple concern either, but a wish to see that man eat a truly good meal every single day. At the time, I still hadn't realized. My feelings for Orlando had already quietly crossed the line between an instructor and a student, without me even noticing when. After that text exchange, a new routine formed between Orlando and me. Every Tuesday and Thursday morning, I would prepare an extra portion of food. Nothing fancy. Some days it was roasted chicken with asparagus. Some days homemade tomato pasta. Some days just a box of salad with a few slices of apple and almonds. I always left the box on the corner of the table in the kitchen before class started. No note, no name written on it. And yet Orlando always knew it was for him. At first he was still shy about it. After a few weeks, he began to respond in his own quiet way. Some days I'd open the fridge and find a can of lemonade placed neatly beside my own lunchbox. Some days a chocolate bar. Some days just a slip of paper written in that now familiar handwriting. "Thank you for making today easier to get through." I carefully folded that piece of paper and kept it in my wallet. Even years later, I never threw it away. One afternoon in late October, it rained heavily. Class ended early because many students asked to leave. By the time I locked the kitchen door, Orlando was still standing under the awning, watching the sheets of white rain. "You didn't bring an umbrella?" He shook his head. "I thought it would be sunny today." "I have a car. I'll drive you." Orlando hesitated. "That's too much trouble. I'm heading that way anyway." "Where do you live?" He named the apartment complex. I laughed. "That's just 10 minutes from my place." He looked a bit surprised. "Really? I have no reason to lie." Eventually, he nodded. Throughout the drive, Orlando sat very still in the passenger seat. Rain tapped against the windshield. The radio played an old jazz tune. Neither of us said anything, but the silence felt comfortable. There are people, and simply having them beside you means you no longer feel the need to fill every quiet moment with words. Orlando was one of those people. The apartment complex he lived in was older than I expected. Red brick building, a narrow, dim hallway. When the car stopped, Orlando unbuckled his seatbelt and turned to me. "Do you want to come up for coffee?" I was a little surprised. "Is that okay?" "I want to thank you." I nodded. "Okay." Orlando's apartment was only about 40 square meters. Small but very tidy. His desk was covered with architectural models. An old bookshelf stood against the window. Beside it, a few tiny cacti in pots. No television. No expensive decorations. But everything was arranged with care. I understood then. Orlando was the kind of person who always tried to create order in his life, no matter how difficult that life might be. "Have a seat. I'll make coffee." I watched his back as he walked toward the kitchen corner. Then I stopped short. That kitchen corner was almost completely bare. One old nonstick pan, one small pot, 2 plates, 2 cups, 1 knife, 1 cutting board. The refrigerator wasn't much better. Just milk, eggs, a few yogurt cups, and a bag of spinach. I asked quietly, "Is this really all you have?" Orlando followed my gaze, then smiled. "It's enough. You never cook, though." The words came out lightly, but I couldn't bring myself to laugh. While Orlando made coffee, I happened to notice a small wooden box on the kitchen shelf. Inside were many old photographs. I was about to look away when one photo slipped and fell to the floor. I bent down to pick it up. In the photo was a boy about 10 years old, standing beside a woman in a white apron. On the table in front of them sat a freshly baked loaf of bread. The woman was smiling brightly. The boy had his arms wrapped around hers. I was about to ask when Orlando stepped over. He gently took the photo back. A long silence followed. Finally, he set his coffee cup down on the table. "That's my mother." For the first time, he was the one bringing up his family on his own. I said nothing. I just waited quietly. Orlando looked at the photo for a long time. "My mom ran a small bakery. I grew up surrounded by the smell of bread." His voice was calm, so calm it made me uneasy. "Every day she woke up at 4 in the morning. I used to sit in the bakery doing my homework. It used to be my favorite place in the world." He smiled faintly, but the smile lasted only a few seconds. Then it disappeared. "She died when I was 16. The room fell into silence. That night, there was an electrical fire at the bakery. I was the one who called the fire department." "But—" Orlando stopped. His hand tightened around the coffee cup. "They couldn't save her." I felt my throat close up. He kept looking down at the table. "Ever since that night, I haven't been able to bear the smell of freshly baked bread. It always pulls me straight back to that day." I remembered the first time he'd run out of class. I remembered the autumn festival. I remembered the pale look on his face every time an oven door opened. Every piece finally fell into place. It wasn't that he hated cooking. It wasn't that he was afraid of fire. He simply had never been able to get past his own grief. "Then why did you sign up for my class?" I asked very softly. Orlando looked at me. "For a long time, my mother once told me, if you ever fall in love with someone, learn to cook for them." He smiled sadly. "I never learned how. I think maybe it's time I did." My heart skipped a beat. I didn't know who Orlando meant, and I didn't dare ask. But in that very moment, I understood. Teaching Orlando to cook had never simply been about teaching him to hold a knife, season a dish, or turn on an oven. It was about helping him find the courage to one day walk back into a kitchen. A place that once held the most beautiful memory of his life, and also the most painful. After that evening at Orlando's apartment, I didn't tell anyone about his story. Not because it was a secret, but because I felt I had just been given something more precious than any promise. Trust. I understood Orlando well enough to know that opening up didn't mean his wounds had healed. It only meant he had decided not to hide them from me any longer. The following week, when I walked into the practice kitchen, Orlando had already arrived early. He stood in front of the stainless steel table, hands in his pockets, staring at the oven as if facing an old rival he hadn't seen in years. I walked over to stand beside him. "Morning." He startled, then smiled. "You're early. So are you." We both looked toward the oven. Neither of us said anything. About a minute later, Orlando spoke. "Garrett." "Yeah. Today. Can I turn the oven on?" I looked at him. "Just turn it on. No need to bake anything yet." I didn't ask anything further. I just nodded. I turned the temperature dial. The oven let out a small click. The fan began to spin. The air in the room hadn't changed, but I could feel Orlando's breathing slow down. He clenched his hands together. Then, he stayed still. He didn't run. I smiled. "All right. That's enough for today." Orlando looked at me. "That's it." "Yeah." I thought you'd make me bake something. I don't teach people by pushing them into the deep end. He laughed. Good. Because I don't know how to swim yet. In the weeks that followed, we moved forward in very small steps. One day, turning on the oven for 5 minutes. The next week, putting an empty tray inside. The week after, roasting vegetables. Then salmon. And finally, bread. I never once rushed him. And Orlando never once gave up. Some days, he had to stand out in the hallway for nearly 10 minutes before he was calm enough to come back inside. I always waited, never pushing, never showing impatience. I came to realize that, for Orlando, winning didn't mean baking a perfect loaf of bread. Winning meant daring to take one more step than the day before. In early November, the whole class had their midterm assessment. Each student had to plan a menu and prepare a simple meal for 2 people. The other students had been excitedly discussing their plans for a week. Orlando sat staring at his sheet of paper for a long time. I don't know what to choose. Why not? I've never cooked for anyone before. Neither have I. He looked up. Really? Yeah. I've only ever cooked for the whole class. Orlando was quiet for a few seconds. Then he asked very softly, if what I make isn't good, would you be disappointed? I shook my head. I'd only be disappointed if you didn't dare to try. 3 days later, Orlando texted me. Are you free Friday evening? I replied almost instantly. Yes. What's going on? It was a few minutes before my phone buzzed again. I want to ask you to taste test my midterm dish. I stared at the screen for a long time. I don't know why, but my heart was beating so fast. Friday evening, I brought a box of homemade cookies to Orlando's apartment. He opened the door wearing a dark blue apron. His hair was still slightly damp. Maybe he'd just showered. Right on time. I'm a teacher, after all. I hate punctuality. Then why invite me? Because I knew you'd come. I laughed. That sentence made the air between us feel so much lighter. The scent inside the apartment was completely different from usual. There was butter, garlic, black pepper, and the very familiar smell of pan-seared chicken. I looked around. The kitchen counter that used to be so bare was now full of ingredients. Fresh herbs, lemon, Parmesan cheese, a small bouquet of flowers in a glass vase. Did you prepare all of this? Orlando scratched his head. Since this afternoon. I watched the video like 10 times. Why didn't you call me? Because I wanted to do it myself. He said it with such seriousness. I suddenly felt my eyes sting. Maybe he didn't realize just how big a step it was for him to stand in that kitchen for hours on end. The dinner wasn't perfect. The chicken was slightly overcooked. The cream sauce was a bit too thick. The pasta was firmer than I usually made it. But I finished every bite. Orlando rested his chin on his hand, watching me. You don't have to force it down. I'm not forcing anything. It's really good. Garrett. You're lying. I'm just overlooking a few technical mistakes. He laughed. I knew it. Still, I set down my fork. This is the best meal any student has ever cooked for me. Why? Because it has a reason behind it. Orlando tilted his head slightly. Since you started this class, you've always cooked to overcome your fear. Today, you cooked because you wanted to invite someone to eat with you. Those are 2 completely different things. He looked at me, his gaze so gentle I could barely bring myself to meet it directly. After dinner, we sat out on the balcony. The city lights had come on. The early winter air carried a slight chill. Orlando suddenly asked, Garrett, have you ever liked someone? I smiled. Yes. Does that person know? No. Why not? I was afraid. Afraid of what? I was afraid that if I told them, I'd lose the friendship too. Orlando was quiet. A moment later, he spoke again. Maybe. That person is afraid of the exact same thing. I turned to look at him. Our eyes met. Neither of us continued the conversation. But in that moment, I felt the distance between us had never been shorter. I still didn't have the courage to ask Orlando who he wanted to learn to cook for. And he never asked me who I had once liked either. And yet, Somewhere in the gentle silence of that early winter night, I began to hope. Maybe the answer for both of us was the same person.